Please see him. He's a good man and thorough.
All right, I'm here with Jessica Brown, formerly known as Jessica Flanagan of The Loving Diet. Jess, it's been a really long time since we sat down and did one of these. Thanks for coming here today. I'm so nice to talk with you.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Joe.
So, what's going on? What's new with you? Look, last time we spoke, you're working on a book, a second book. I know that you had just finished a program and you've really changed the way you've been doing things since we first met. I believe, if memory serves, we had a real shared interest back in the day about autoimmune paleo diet. And my have things haven't really changed. It's just more things have come to light since then. More information has come to light. There's a lot of ins, there's a lot of outs, right? So tell me what's new with you. Where have you been since the AIP lifestyle? Is the AIP lifestyle on Facebook?
That
AIP?
was my website name
Okay.
a number of years ago. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So how's it going with AIP? And what are you into now?
I do occasionally have clients that come see me because they find my name in the AIP world. And my approach, of course, like all good approaches that have been touched by science and evolved, I definitely give them different advice than I used to. I do run a pretty big group on Facebook, almost 10,000 people, called Beyond AIP. And that's really useful because it captures the journey that people are taking, good, bad, ugly, the success stories, and then also the stories of people who encountered eating disorders, disordered eating, histamine intolerances. So I run that group. And then what I'm doing in my professional life these days is I'm writing a book on emotional eating. So I'm pretty excited about that, turning in my manuscript in just a few weeks. And I also just finished being a guest faculty member at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. They asked me to help teach a new mindful eating program that they have launched. So that's really exciting. And then I think the things that I did a couple of years before that, Stanford University has a compassion teacher training program that's a year long. And so I enrolled in that and I completed that and I became a compassion teacher. So it's shaped who I am. I think I've just been growing and shifting since my days of thinking that the autoimmune paleo diet would save everyone who has autoimmunity.
Wow. So it's cool to talk to somebody who, well, you didn't really drink the Kool-Aid, but it was at the time, AIP was revolutionary, right? AIP had come out and it was like there's a food plan that a person with autoimmunity could follow that could dramatically improve their quality of life. And so I think a lot of that's how you and I were in a similar functional medicine class around that time. I think Dr. Zatis Karazny was teaching some stuff, and that he introduced me to that. He's still a great mentor for me. And it's really interesting that you're still beyond AIP, but AIP isn't, you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but tell me, like, how have things progressed for you as a clinician and as a leader in the field, like in terms of AIP, for those of you who are new to it, it's if you avoid grains, nightshades, nuts, eggs, uh,
See,
seeds. Okay, so like
Gary.
AIP is basically a variation of a lectin restricted diet. Lectins are proteins that are part of most foods that we eat, but some foods like beans, for example, can be very high in lectins. And people that have autoimmunity, lectins can be very difficult to digest. So they go into the body, they don't get digested well, and they go into the small intestine and the immune system can start reacting to it there. And then that can be the crux of either a leaky gut causing autoimmunity or something called molecular mimicry, just basically saying, wow, this food looks just like my body, so the body can attack both of those. And so there's all these folks that when this diet first came out, latched onto it. And you remember how awesome it was when that first came out? Like people were like literally like losing symptoms they've had for 15 years. And these amazing things were happening with clients. And then for some people, it would come back though. And so they would restrict their food plan. They would feel better. And then they'd go on like basically lean meats and vegetables, something like that, some variation of that. And they would feel better. And then they'd start reacting to the new foods. And then they couldn't go back to the old foods. So that was a disaster. And then some people just got worse on AIP. And so as a clinic practitioner, as a clinician, it's okay. So when I see it in the clinical setting, I go, okay, that's not cool, we better figure something else out. But then this whole movement started where people that are not clinicians latched onto this, and they were like sharing their truth and their story, which is this is what works so wonderfully for them. And they wanted to get that out because they went to all these doctors and couldn't find a solution. And so AIP worked for them. And then they're out there almost like, what's the word?
Proselytizing.
Preaching about the religion of AIP. And people that were not doing better on it, or maybe did better and then did worse, they're basically, what happened to those folks? Do you remember those days? What was going on?
A lot of the Facebook groups, and this is back when Facebook was a little bit more popular than it is now. It was pre-Instagram. Instagram got invented while AIP was alive or first started. So a lot of these groups were run by very well-meaning people. Their hearts were in the right places, and fear is a powerful drug. And there was a lot of fear mixed with people who perhaps shouldn't have been giving the advice, but came from a good-hearted place because what worked for them, they thought would work for other people. There was not enough individual approaches happening to look at each person and what was going on with their guts that weren't going on with others. So I think that it became a movement where, unfortunately, there was very little flexibility. And you are either with us or you're against us. Sort of the thing that I heard from a lot of people who felt burned by what was going on. And a lot of people who thought, wow, I feel so much better. So I'm just going to get even more strict. And so I can feel even better. And that sometimes has a negative side effect because, as we know, and we really needed to go into AIP and watch a whole bunch of people on it to see what was going to happen. But when we restrict too much for too long, there are negative consequences to that. And that was not known at the very beginning of AIP, or at least the people who were doing it, their voices weren't heard because they were being squashed by moderators who said that you're not following AIP if you say what you're going to say about how it didn't work, or whatever it might be. That's somebody's story about it.
Not just that, but it was the vitriol associated with it. This is what was blowing my mind. It was like, hey, listen, this didn't work for this person. They're just letting other people know that are here, that are expecting like these miraculous changes, like that maybe it's okay that it didn't work for you and that you're not alone. And those people were literally castigated and basically run out of town like Rambo or something. Like, hey, what are you doing walking through town here? Let's just take you to the edge of town. And why don't you have a nice box of Scram, okay?
Including me.
And that's what I'm saying. So you, for a while, you embodied, or not embodied, but you really took on the more like clinical educational side of this thing, and you were really helping a ton of people with AIP. And so as somebody who has experience, like actual clinical experience working with somebody or hundreds of people with AIP, I'm sure you saw the same things that I saw, people getting better and then people getting better for a while and not lasting, people getting worse. As a clinician, you can't just say, we got worse, you're screwed. You try to figure it out. So when you, as a clinician, as a huge part of this community, and before there was a word influencer, I would say you were influencing this community in a big way and leading the way and helping people understand how food could contribute to their quality of life. How were you received? Was it the same? Or what? I know the answer to this, but like, tell me a little bit about that, because it's like, did you have contact with the leaders, the so-called, look, I don't want to say that if you're not a medical professional, then you don't have an opinion, you don't have anything to offer. Okay. But there's a total difference between guiding somebody through somebody that they're stuck and not just saying, if it works for me, it works for everybody else. And then basically telling somebody they're wrong because their body reacted differently than yours. So what was it like for you? Because I know that I've had some experience with people that went through that as like a patron, so to speak, or a civilian almost, but like, what was it like for you?
What was it like for me? It was really hard. It was hard personally. It was hard professionally. I am a compassion teacher, and compassion has been forefront in the work that I've done since I've worked. And when my clients cried, felt hopeless, perhaps we could say became even close to suicidal. I could not turn my back on them. And I believed them and I listened to them, and I didn't care what moderators and groups said. I didn't care what authorities or leaders in AIP said. I got mocked. I was blackballed. I was blacklisted. I had verbal attacks on me. It was because I was saying, we need to listen to people who are suffering and getting worse on this diet. There's something missing, and I believe them. That's what I did. And the response, it was very hard for me personally, but in hindsight, I'm so thankful for that as a person, because it helped me understand how to believe in yourself, how to stand up for the thing that you feel like is right. And it made me a better person and forge out on my own to help people who didn't know where to go. They had nowhere else to go.
It's really, to me, I just think you're such high integrity on this, because not only were you sticking up for the patient, but you had a huge vested interest to stick with that. You could have been one of the people that was like towing the company line and like radicalizing. Yes. You know how like right now it seems like one way to really make a name for yourself is just to be radical and take the extreme position on everything, and then almost like have a holy war about it and then put other people down if it doesn't match your position. And then you find followers and an identity in that. And it's just really interesting to me that you stuck with, just like you found AIP, you also started to see as you worked with it that there were some limitations to it, which really makes sense. And then you started speaking about the limitations, and then the community that you really maybe even indirectly helped create somehow turn their back on you, and then try to make it seem like you were some sort of like wanker or like super daft or something. I don't know what was going on there. I just thought that was so interesting. And of course, I'm just generally disagreeable anyway, so I had no problem with people telling me I was an idiot. I'm like, all right, go ahead. And I think
the exact term was, she cannot be trusted. And what's so fascinating is that every person who towed that party line now has reversed course about how they feel about AIP. I just happened to do it about 5 or 6 years before they came to understand that there are dangers, and you should take a look at specific things before you decide to go on a restrictive diet. You should look for certain things. You should screen every single person who tells you they want to go on AIP as a clinician for past eating disorders before you allow them to go on such an intense restrictive diet, an elimination diet. So I find it interesting, and I'm really happy too, because they found their way to a broader vision, just like I did. It just took a few years, and I was just willing to stand up and say something quicker, because my integrity was worth more than the money that I would make if I continue forward making all the money that I did on AIP.
It almost feels like it would be blood money at that point, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Like it would be stained if you just kept doing something outside of integrity. But when you think about this, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the folks that had castigated you had come around. What was that like? Did they ever come back to you and say, I'm sorry?
No, because they all blocked me on social media, and I was blacklisted so quickly.
Wow. Okay.
And you know what it did? It forced me to, again, believe in myself. You find out who your friends are really quickly. You and I have remained friends for so long. Not that you were involved in this at all, but you do find out who your family is, who your friends are when you go through something that's really challenging. I was fortunate to have a tremendous amount of support, and I would not be doing the work that I'm doing now unless I had gone through what I had gone through then. So I really do share this story with such a huge measure of gratitude for that happening.
People know that we're friends. Some people know that we're friends. And so I had a couple of people during that time ask me like, what was going on with you? And I'm like, what do you mean? She's a clinician who sees the light in terms of, hey, listen, this isn't a panacea, is talking openly about it, and is now being given the runaround. What's going on with everybody else? Why would you turn on your leader? It was very fascinating. It's very interesting. I'm glad that look, a lot of people have gone through less and have just said, peace out, and they just left. I don't need this crap. But before we get into the loving diet and then your next book, I really would like to flesh out what you were saying there, because I think you said something really important. And I think people that have been relying on food plans to help themselves need to hear this. And I think what makes you and I a bit of a dynamic duo in this field is that, like, you touch on all the important, I think, some of the most important things that you don't touch on. You go into depth on some of the things that I am aware of, that I screen for a little bit with clients, but I don't necessarily get into depth on. And I get into depth on things like oral tolerance, the immune aspects of this, some of the neurobiology of it, the neuroendocrine immunology, all this stuff. So I get into those like micro details, and I understand how emotional things influence that. But like where you've gone into a whole nother paradigm, which is to say, and I think it's like kind of a level of mastery. A lot of folks that I have been going along with in my career that are now like me 20 years or 20 years plus in their career, they all get to the same point, which is we see so many things in our clinic that are like physical and chemical and immunological compensations for actual emotional problems by which the way we relate to the world. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're doing is you're not turning your back on all this other stuff, but you're saying nobody else is talking about one of the core issues, which is if this person doesn't relate well to themselves or relate well to the world, there's really no amount of diet that's going to actually cause a lasting change for this person. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, but it seems like that's become your focus. Is that right?
Yes. And those who don't relate well to their diagnoses, or they don't relate well to the outlook, the health outlook of their illness that they have. Those are really important things. And what I found is that just in general, it is really challenging for humans to lean in to places that hold hurt, suffering, pain. It's just really hard for us to lean in. And that's where a lot of the treasure lies, is to rework the relationship, because often the foundation of the pain that people feel that they don't want to face when they get a big diagnosis, that's so scary, because it's, for some people, it's so scary it can kill you, is that you understand what it is that you believe about yourself, your life. Sometimes God's punishing me by this diagnosis, or relationships. So there is a really amazing opportunity for a lot of people if they are taught how to lean in to the pain and not be afraid of it. But our culture does not teach us how to lean in. In fact, our culture rewards people who seem to have no pain and get above it all. We can see that there's a lot of ways now that people can do that. So that's the world that I'm working in. And my experience with AIP helped prepare me for that. Everything that I do with my clients, I have done hundreds and hundreds of times myself. And so, but my clients both help me to go deeper inside my own, lean in deeper inside my own fears and pain, but also I feel prepared to help people, because I really do think it's important to believe them when they say I'm scared. And we don't ask that enough as clinicians.
Yeah.
Joe, when you think about the people that you see, how afraid do you think they are of what they're facing?
I have to say, I love fear. I use it all the time. I'm a huge fear monger in my practice. So I want them completely afraid, and that way I have ultimate control over every decision they make. So that's where I go. So I maybe we should end this interview. I don't know. But I think that what's interesting is the orienting reflex in the brain it's set a priori to the unknown. So even people that have got a good referral, or they trust me as a person already when they come in, or I start to build that trust with them, anytime something new is shared, our brain goes, what is that? And then it has to process it and decide if it's safe or a threat. And let's say I work in a practice where I see a lot of like brain type stuff. Yeah. People that their brains are struggling a bit, like concussion or anxiety or depression, and there's various reasons for it. So imagine like the part of your brain that says, I actually can think about this, process it as safe, and then categorize it and move on. A lot of folks don't have that capacity. So I tell them something new, just like, oh, chipper, I think I'm like sharing the keys to the kingdom as it is for their recovery, and they just look at me and I see it. I can see them going into a fear response. And I'm like, shoot, I did it. I got to talk a little slower or figure out a way to communicate that. But of course, I run into the same issue that so many clinicians is like, we only, even in an hour session, it takes more than 1 hour to help people with their fear of stuff. So like here I am trying to get all this condensed information that's useful to them. But if they get locked into a fear response or if it's overwhelming to them, it's almost like, well, it's very difficult at that point. So the answer to your question is I see that quite a bit. I don't think I address it the same way that you do, but I do feel that I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen that deer in headlights look, or worse, you know what I mean? It's the thing where they start looking away or they start, it's like all that like nonverbal communication stuff. The arms cross, the feet start going towards the door, even though they're looking at you, the feet are towards the door. It's all the stuff that they're like, I just got to get out of here kind of stuff. Yeah, I see that all the time. Yeah. And I think it's really cool that you're part of the conversation in the functional medicine community, which is to start addressing this as integral part of a care plan rather than just something either you ignore or notice. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, let's give an example of this. You get diagnosed. Let's say as a child, you grew up in a family where you experienced a lot of verbal abuse. You were perhaps told that you'd amount to nothing. You felt like you were a burden on your family. And so if you are told those messages over and over again from the place that you're supposed to find safety, at some point in time, you're probably going to conclude something about yourself. Whether it's true or not, you don't know because you're young and you don't have people helping you say, hey, that's actually not true. So you decide perhaps that there's something wrong with you. And because that makes it add up of why you're getting verbally abused by a parent. So if you consider that something is wrong with you, and then years later, you get diagnosed with MS, and you still in a deep place that you're not even aware of because, of course, it's unconsciously being played out in everything that you do, that you were made wrong, then it's really hard to find hope. It's hard. It's like, oh yeah, see, my diagnosis is making me add up that whole I got made wrong. Of course this is happening. I expected something bad to happen because I was made wrong. And so this is where it comes into the role of us as clinicians. And every clinician has a different role that they play, but help people understand that they believe it. And then to, as a clinician, see restricted diet might not work very well for them because they believe that there's something wrong with them. So perhaps they're going to have a lot of apprehension that they're not going to be able to do the diet right, that they're going to fail before they begin. Things that have come from experience very long ago. So I find that, and I'm just going to put in here too, Joe, that when you were talking about when you have clients that like start going like this, or they look away and their nervous system gets jacked up, but that you are a person who really believes that healing is possible. You are a person that really sees the big picture. And I think in your mind, you just see all the steps that they need to go through. You have a lot of confidence. And so your nervous system is actually quite regulated when you're talking to somebody. And that's a lot of times how we connect with people. My nervous system is very regulated when I talk to my clients because I believe that they can understand what framework they're operating to try to get better, and they can use the power of their hearts to change it if they want. You do it in just a little bit of a different way, your own way, but your heart's still in the right place, or not, maybe not the right place. It's in a loving place.
Oh, thank you.
That makes sense. Yeah. Which is also probably why we've been friends for so long.
I know, right?
I recognize that in you, and you recognize that in me.
It just seems like, at least with you, I come less from a place of ego. I don't have to with you. It's nice. And so we've been able to stay connected, even though there are times when I listen to you and I'm like, okay, that's a little bit different than where I thought this. I wouldn't say you challenge my paradigm, but you show me something new. And I either have to accept that, or maybe I don't accept it, but that doesn't mean I don't accept you. But generally I accept it, right? When you say stuff, because I think that you spend a lot of effort figuring out things that aren't really getting looked at in that way. So I see you as a trailblazer that way. I think it's really cool. And of course, like other people do too, that's how you ended up on faculty. And it's really neat. So earlier you were saying, so I think I could follow most of what you're about to say, but I'm really curious about the things that I wouldn't know. So earlier you were saying, okay, so if you're thinking about doing a restricted food plan to help yourself, or you're maybe advocating for other people by recommending this, like there's right now the biggest one that I see is carnivore. People are just really advocating for the carnivore food plan, which is another restricted food plan. And of course you can't just be like, there's nothing worse, Jess, is there, than like somebody comes to you or goes to a doctor and let's say they've been struggling with like juvenile rheumatoid arthritis for like 6 years. Mm-hmm. And they're still a juvenile, right? But they're still young. And then they found this thing online, like with Michaela Peterson, and they're like, oh, I'm going to try this. And they try it and it works for them. And then the doctors, that can't work. And they're literally telling them that their experience is not true. So you have that. But then you have people that it's not working for, they have no idea where to begin. So I'm curious what you would tell people now, because you started getting into that. Like, what would you tell people now before you start getting into a restricted food plan? Maybe consider these things. So what would you recommend people consider before they even start?
A stool test.
Okay.
Doing basic blood work to look at their inflammatory markers, because we can do a whole lot with the gut at the beginning before we start restricting food. A general elimination provocation diet, not that big of a deal. AIP is so heightened. Carnivore, very heightened, takes so much out. So what I say is, if you want to do carnivore, that's awesome. Is it okay if we talk about this a little first? Would you consider these options?
Jess, hang on a second. Hang on. What the hell is this? I keep hearing that you've turned your back on the functional medicine community, and the first thing you start talking about is functional medicine stuff? I thought you abandoned all this stuff. What the hell? Come on. Wait, you still believe in science and biology? What is this?
I know.
Okay, all right. So stool testing, we want to know if they can digest and absorb food, or if they have a dysbiosis that would cause some problems and make them not respond. Okay. And then you said some metabolic testing. What would you recommend?
Just looking at inflammatory markers, homocysteine, C-reactive protein, doing a chem screen, doing a CBC, looking at what their antibodies are, just doing the practical pieces first, because remember, fear is a very powerful drug. And when somebody is going to come to me and say, I really want to go on carnivore, I'm going to say, I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. I'm going to give you some information for you to consider, perhaps before, that will save you needing to do restriction at that level, possibly for long periods of time. But the number one thing that I ask everybody now, and this was the thing that I started asking people in autoimmune paleo that opened everything up, is when I see somebody that I think might be choosing a restrictive diet out of being scared, then I ask them, are you choosing to do this diet out of abundance or lack? People pretty much know right away. And if they don't, then they spend a little bit of time thinking about it, and maybe nothing comes to their mind, but then they can feel certain things in their body, certain emotions. And so if that would be the thing, where with the carnivore diet, it might save somebody. Who's me to say that it won't? But what I would say is, if you start the carnivore diet from a place of not believing in yourself, having fear drive your decision-making process, will it work as good as, nope, everything inside of me says I need to try this, and I feel like I really want to be around for my family. I really want to enjoy my life. I love my career. I want to keep doing it. So these are all abundant statements. I want to be more in the world, not less in the world. And so then as clinicians, you can really start using that. And that's how I start sorting.
Wow, that's very interesting. But what if, okay, so there's like kind of this idea that left brain is more associated with reward and right brain is more associated with punishment. Yep. And so in like the world of ADHD and like spectrum type disorders, or developmental disorders, I should say, there's this idea that you either use reward or punishment based upon the hemisphericity of the child. A child that is like left brain dominant probably wouldn't do well with like more reward. They'd probably do well with more punishment, whereas a child that's right brain dominant definitely would respond more to punishment or to reward, than to punishment. So I wonder, because when you say this, like I have celiac, family grow wheat in South Dakota right now, and like my ancestors moved to North Dakota. They're just like, man, we really want to start, the US was like, we really want to start growing wheat in like this part of our country, but who's going to do that? So they get a bunch of Norwegians to move from Norway. They're like, they'll do it. So we actually have land still in North Dakota that was like part of that. My grandma on my mom's side was born on one of these farms and literally was like in a farmhouse, and there was no incubator. So they put her on the stove.
Wow.
To keep her warm on a wood burning stove. It was wild. For me, when you said that, I'm like, I don't know if I ever made a dietary change out of abundance. Still, I have celiac and I know that I want to feel better. So maybe that's an abundant statement, but man, I never wanted to give up wheat. Sincerely wanted to. I always felt a little bit, maybe a little bit of family guilt around it. Even though I felt validated that they found that, because I had some like skin and like anxiety issues as a child that partially stemmed from that. I didn't know it. So I think that this idea is pretty amazing because I do it, but maybe I would find a better way to do that if I really embraced the other side of that, the abundant side of it. Because most people, I got to say, what you're saying, I knew I was going to learn something crazy today, because like, I don't know that I've met a patient who was like, yes, doctor, please tell me the things that I love eating the most are contributing to my disease, and tell me that, yes, I'm giving this up out of abundance, not because I'm scared that I'm going to get more sick. I think you're basically saying that the majority of people that are giving stuff up are doing so not from abundance. And I just think that's a kind of a mind-blowing concept I'm still wrestling with. You can see like veins coming out of my head. Turns out I'm not a machine, everybody. I thought I was a machine, but like now I'm completely surprised by this. So
there's a lot
really
of
interesting question. I think anybody watching this could implement in their practice, and as a patient, asking yourself that, because if you're struggling with it, it's really hard to get something to last if you don't want to do it. You know what I mean?
Well said. Yeah. There's a lot of groundwork that goes into, I said it like so simply, and it's not.
Make it sound so simple.
But sometimes an abundance thing could be like, so, you have celiac, and of course you don't want to give up gluten. Like I gave up gluten. I don't want to give up gluten. But we have to also think about the content of what abundance means. So sometimes an abundance statement would be like, I'm sad. I'm really sad. I'm willing to sit with the sadness over having to give up gluten for the sake of my long-term health. That's an abundance statement.
Okay.
So we also have to go a little bit under the surface and look at, this is the work that I do, is ask my clients questions to help understand this process and help them sort out what it is that's present for them that is in the abundance bucket and the lack bucket. And oftentimes it is easy to get those two confused, but I found it's one of the best ways to approach this, because a lot of people feel like the world and life is punishing them, and it's like we're just going through the slog of being human. And then when you add on getting a diagnosis of a very complex disease, it just feels like more. And so is the work that we're doing to navigate our health a burden? Maybe. But is it okay to feel sad about that and learn coping skills to handle that pain, which will then make somebody move into an abundance model? I think so.
And that's where your focus is with people you're seeing right now on a one-to-one basis, right? You also have support groups, I believe, that you started. Is that right?
Yes, the transformational eating is learning about what someone's inner eater believes, and really learning the skills of self-compassion and weaving them into the life that they have with their health and with eating. because I find that so the opposite of the autoimmune paleo diet would be intuitive eating. And we don't often look at how intuitive eating is based upon the beliefs that we have that we might not even be aware of, that are just unconscious and feeding us how we do life, and that we can't really bypass those with our intuition if they have a very important role of safety in our life.
Okay, so can you expand more about intuitive eating? Because I know that there are some people in kind of my field that just think that's just the biggest hogwash bullshit they've ever heard in their life. No offense, they literally said that to me, and I'm like, okay, and they're like, that's just bullshit. Like people that have food sensitivities that are causing real problems for them, maybe intuitively wanting to eat those foods. So they just think it's all garbage. And I don't think that, but I think that's one position. You've probably heard that before. So what do you say to that? Like, how would you explain to us, to that person, or maybe somebody who wanted to explore that, but they had a loved one just say it was complete bullshit? Like, how would you extrapolate more about that? Because I really think people don't understand it, and I don't know that I understand it fully, and I'd like to learn more.
I think that so it is about leaning in and doing what feels good and caring. But any of us, when we go in and we try to decide how to eat from a loving and caring way, and that there's no foods that are off limits, and that diets don't work, and you're just fighting against your natural weight set point, it's a simplified way of telling people to just not throw away the food rules. And what I've found is that people still judge themselves in the way that they eat. Intuitive eating often doesn't work when people have an eating disorder, disordered eating, emotional eating. And a lot of times it doesn't work when people have complex illnesses and they're trying to navigate that as well. I think it doesn't go far enough or deep enough. And so, in some regards, I probably would agree with some of your colleagues that it's
All
a
the
little bit.
context, right? Is what you're saying. It's the context. So people are taking one thing out of context, and then they're basically running with that without even having a real discussion or investigation. They're just looking at the headline, and then they're basically ignoring the rest of it. It'd be like somebody telling them the AIP was complete bullshit, or that like a restricted food plan is bullshit, because they saw and then didn't even look at the rest of it and go, that wasn't even the context of the statement, dude. So what are you getting all bent out of shape about? And before you start low-key character assassinating somebody for having a different opinion, maybe look into it. You know what I mean? That's what I think. What is intuitive eating, if you could just encapsulate it in a couple of sentences? We know that it's context dependent, but a lot of people have a sense of what that is, but maybe they haven't heard from an actual professional the actual definition of it.
It's throwing out the food rules. It is leaning into what foods feel right for you. And it's also taking away any labels that foods are good or bad. It's ditching the diet mentality.
Okay.
Now,
Okay,
the problem is that if we are going to lean in and listen to our inner voice, that intuitive voice, and there's no such thing as good or bad food, and we need to throw away the rules around eating, then that works really well if you have no trauma, you're not traumatized, and if you eat no ultra processed foods.
Okay.
Because ultra processed foods it's been shown, science has shown it without a doubt, skews the hunger fullness cues. So the very intuition that you're leaning into, your own cues that say, you should eat, you should eat now because you're hungry. If you're in a diet, your diet's going to say don't eat. But if you're having ultra processed foods, they are factory designed to stimulate you wanting more and being addicted.
Oh, come on, Jess. I haven't had Cocoa Pebbles in probably 20 years, and I still think about them every morning. So I don't know if there's any truth to that whatsoever.
I remember the first time my father fed me Velveeta cheese. I think I was 5 or 6 years old. I so clearly remember it. He came with this loaf of factory made oil called Velveeta cheese. And I was like, this was a good invention. Whoever did this, thank you very much.
I didn't know that. So I didn't know that the intuitive eating crowd was like, hey, listen, you can't just, don't consider refined food as food, basically. So we're saying we're dropping the roles, but let's call food and let's call refined things and maybe not include that as something that you could have an intuition about it because it's been engineered to make you think a certain way.
Well, that no food is good or bad. So they all have equal weight.
Except for we try not to consider the refined foods. Is that what you're saying? Because refined foods.
They include refined foods.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yes.
Yep. I might have misunderstood you. So you were saying just a second ago that one of the things that you mentioned something about refined foods, but which led to the Cocoa Pebbles comment. So what did you mean by that? Maybe I misunderstood it.
That the two groups of people I see, actually there's more than that, but the groups of people that I see who don't fare well on intuitive eating are highly traumatized individuals, people who eat a primarily processed diet, neurodivergent, people who are on certain medications that impact their interoception. GLP-1 medication is a perfect example because it's a brain pharmaceutical that goes directly into the satiety cues. And there's so many factors that impact our ability to make decisions about how we eat. To say, I'm just going to intuitively eat, it sounds so awesome. And I'm all for it. I just don't see it work well in complex people. And that's the world that you and I work in.
Hey, there are people that think you're the champion of intuitive eating. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
I don't know if it's a dark web. I don't know where I saw that, but I've heard people talk about it. Here's the deal. Like, I think what you're saying is intuitive eating could be, this reminds me of a date that I had. I played it off as I was joking, but you know the word epitome?
Yes.
It's spelled, it looks like you would say epitome.
Yes.
We're on this date and I said something like, that's the epitome of this. And then she said, oh yeah. And I go, really? It's probably the epitome, which is slightly different. And I really believed it was slightly different. I really believed that. It was slightly different. So then she's like, what? And then I just played it off like I was joking, like I always do. And so that worked out. But I think if I understand what you're saying here, it's that, wouldn't it be cool if we all could be able to embrace intuitive eating? But the work that you do is actually helping people get to that point. Okay, would that be accurate? Because you're working people with compulsions or history of weird habits around food or whatever. Do you work with people that have like straight up anorexia or bulimia?
Yes. Yes. I teach compassion classes at the Healthy Teen Project in San Francisco. And yes, I do. But I think that really the takeaway here of, if someone wants to categorize what my thesis statement is, it's that it does not matter how you eat. It does not matter what diet you are on. It does not matter if you skip from AIP to carnivore to intuitive eating to the Mediterranean diet. What is going to keep you caught and in an oppressed state is the judgments that you have towards yourself doing any of those. And that's why AIP stopped working for a lot of my clients, is because they were fears of a powerful drug and they were terrified of dying. And because they had a whole bunch of judgments about their complaints that AIP was too hard. They had complaints about how they felt like the universe was punishing them. They questioned if they had what it would take to heal. So it's the judgments. And that's why compassion works so well, is because compassions clear up judgments that we have towards ourselves. So I teach people how to understand what their belief systems are that create judgments that are preventing them from reaching the goals that they have.
Okay. But you're also not telling people with celiac that gluten doesn't matter.
I'm not telling them that.
Right.
I'm saying, I will still care about you if you eat gluten, but you have celiac disease and there's severe implications if you were to eat it. That's called practicality.
Not fear-mongering.
We don't throw out practicality. Yeah.
Just being practical. I think that's such an important statement because that's where a lot of people get stuck in that conversation.
Yeah.
It's logical. It makes so much sense. Okay. When people reach out to you, do you tend to work with people more one-on-one? Do you tend to do more? I think I saw before you would have like, periodically you would start over and you would have like a group. And then once that group was full, then you would launch that. Am I accurate there, or have you changed since that version?
I do half and half. So half of my work is group work, which is small groups. So I very rarely take people more than 10 people at a time in my group. And I work with them 6 to 8 weeks every week in a group setting where we can build trust and caring and practice the skills of being kind to ourselves and looking at where we're judging ourselves. I also work one-on-one because some people don't like groups. Some people still want to do the stool testing. I still do tests as a clinical nutritionist. And so my role is to really meet people where they're at. And I care very deeply about honoring their timeline and how fast they want to move or how slow they want to move, because what's the rush?
Okay, I'd love to connect people to you. So maybe we could share how to get a hold of you in the description of this video. That would be really cool.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You work strictly in person? Is it strictly remote? How are you doing that?
I'm strictly remote. My website and all my social media is called The Loving Diet. The Facebook group is called Beyond AIP. My professional page on Facebook is called The Loving Diet. So those are all the places I think to reach me for specifically for appointments.
Speaking of The Loving Diet, that book has stayed with me. The thing that stayed with me the most was that you helped me with was I trust my life. I trust my life. I trust my life. So there's been some moments where it's really, I had to say that a lot of times in a day. That was my favorite thing from that book. So thank you for that. And so what year did you write that?
2015.
Wow. So we're almost 10 years later and your second book is coming out and
March or April.
Mm-hmm. Next year?
Mm-hmm.
So is this like a sequel to that book? How would you describe it?
It's completely different. It's mostly different. This book is all of the professional learning and building I've been doing for the past 10 years. It is a incredibly rich book that will show people how to build skills of compassion and how compassion, self-compassion, when you combine it with reparenting, is what transforms the judgments that you have that are holding you back from the goals that you want to achieve, that are creating the framework of choosing out of lack versus abundance and helping us to trust ourselves and build emotional resilience. So when the next thing in life comes, you will not need to feel the need to turn away from yourself, and you can stick with it, stick with the pain, examine it, see what it's there to help you discover about yourself.
Do you have a chapter in that book about the idea that the world is punishing them? Because it's something I see so often, and it'd be hard not to feel that way. If you have some of these chronic issues and every doctor you said you look good, but you're just normal, or there's really nothing wrong with you. And other people seem to be living their life in abundance and joy. And then here you are struggling to function. And maybe the people that were at your side have now all left and you're on your own and broke. It'd be probably hard not to believe that to some extent. What do you tell that person?
That's where practicality comes in, where, as my husband says, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And you honor where you're at and start looking at what it is that you believe and why. And so I just help people unpack that. The one thing here, though, and this would be a question I have for you as a clinician, is this is what I found. And part of the reason why I developed this work is that there are not very many places to send clients. There's therapy, but therapy works on the mind, and that's amazing. And it has its role, and it's super, super helpful. We're talking about working with the heart. My role is as a compassion teacher, and using that reparenting is heart work. And I find that so many of the sorrows that humans have is held in their heart. Their mind is just helping to execute the plan, to protect the heart from that experience. And so I found that there's not a lot of resources for people. Some people choose like a spiritual path, or now there's lots of ayahuasca and microdosing, and which I don't know how I feel about that. But as a clinician, what do you do? Where do you send people? Do you feel like there's a need for a more comprehensive approach?
Yeah, for sure. I get stuck in the brain too, but I understand what you're saying. I had a really I got a really cool presentation recently in France from a colleague who was talking about, I say Bach, but some people say batch, but Bach flower remedies, and how useful they can be. But the thing is, if they're used incompletely or just given to somebody without the process of goal setting and like doing that in work at the same time, then it's almost useless. Okay, but doing it at the same time can be really amazing for folks. And so that's something I'm interested in, and I've started looking at in a clinical setting here. I know hypnosis is something that I do with people to try to help. So the default mode network is the part of the brain that we default back into when we're not attending to a task. And a lot of people default into ruminating, self-limiting thoughts. And so like hypnosis is something that I find useful. I do that if I feel like they need more in-depth psychology kind of work with that, then I'll try to find somebody I'll refer out for that. Heart math is something I've heard of that I think can be useful. What do you think of those things, and how are they different than what you're doing? Because it seems to me like what you're doing is very, how would I say, intentional for this thing, but then it goes, the ramifications of it go beyond simply like eating. It's like learning how to love yourself, which I think is, it's like if you don't, then nothing will work. Like as from a clinical perspective, you just see it. You see the person who says they want to do something, have a really hard time doing it. They seem to have even the capacity, or their exam finding is improving, but they seem to be stuck and can't seem to get over. And so we don't know what they're thinking. And if what they're thinking is this isn't going to work and I don't deserve this, or if they believe that, even if they're not thinking it, I think what you're saying is that comes from the heart, and I can't argue with that. Where I start to think about that is the basal ganglia is part of the brain that kind of, they have fixed action patterns. So like when we're a baby, before we even have a memory, we can learn how to relate to the world, and then that allows our brain to be efficient. So let's say we're in a dangerous situation, this fixed action pattern of compulsive activity will activate, and all of our autonomic responses, digestion, detoxification, elimination, heart function, respiration, are tied into that. Yep. So from that point forward, anytime our body senses that same level of danger, the exact same program opens, and it selects that program instead of other programs. And so the way the basal ganglia works is we have a memory, an expectation of outcome, and then a reward. So the memory is like, oh, this is dangerous. The expectation of outcome is I could get hurt. And the reward is avoiding that. Or the memory is, wow, this is wonderful. I experience pleasure and joy from this. I'm going to move towards that. Let's say you're a person and you're sitting here, you're like, I don't know if this is going on. Listen, if your modus operandi is that before you even had a memory, before your brain even could make explicit memories, they're all implicit, they're in there. And you may have been around somebody that wasn't, I grew up in a generation, Jess, where it was like, it was taught, parents were taught to let your kid cry out in the middle of the night and never go to them because they'll just learn that they need you. No shit. Okay.
Right,
Like, they might need their parent. You know what I mean? So I grew up in a generation where that was true, and in a generation where it was like considered unmasculine to need something.
Okay, I'm going to say, because you are so good with the brain, I will tell you this approach, and I would be curious what you think, because we've never talked about this. Let's use cry it out. Let's say it's a 5-year-old, so they're old enough to decide something about their life. And when we use the skills of self-compassion and reparenting, there's this idea that love isn't bound by space or time. And so here's a 5-year-old being neglected, and its nervous system is dysregulating, right? And so then we work to try to help regulate nervous systems, and you have your own cool way to do it. I have mine. there's this idea that we have the power to move love to a place on your own timeline where it seemed as though you were being abandoned and you were terrified because of that your love is so strong that you could actually regulate the nervous system of you at 5 by imagining being with yourself then.
Okay.
And that then you actually even shift how you remember it, so that the same things that would elicit, maybe you heard Bozo the Clown song that reminded you of when you were 5 and you had to cry out, terrified,
Yeah.
right? And then you all of a sudden you hear the Bozo the Clown song and then you're not terrified anymore. And so that my vision is, and this is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, is that's how powerful our own care is that I can actually we can regulate our own nervous system from an event that happened in the past that is still dysregulating us in the present.
Okay. That's amazing. And I'm completely ignorant in this, so please forgive me if I'm way off. I only have the context of things that I've heard as similar. Is this kind of similar to family constellation kind of thing?
I would say yes, or internal family systems. I have never taken internal family systems or family constellation, but my own teacher, who I've been working with for 20 years, teaches it in the field of what's called noetic field therapy, which I'm a practitioner in. And then I've expanded it a little bit with the food piece. And so, yes, it's along the same lines.
Oh, that's so cool. And what I like about this stuff is that if a person, it's like, what if your belief is what's holding you back, but it's outside your conscious awareness? You just run into this like glass ceiling in your life. And imagine you have these maladaptive beliefs. Who's to say they're maladapted? Okay, you believe it because you had an environment that said this is appropriate, but it may not be serving you anymore. At, let's say this is at 5, it may not be serving you as an adult to have this triggered every time. So if a person is able to change the foundational beliefs that drive these physiological processes, which cause the autoimmune presentations and cause the brain fog, that they've had a concussion or significant trauma with that.
Yep.
It causes the postural, look, this all started for me as a chiropractor. Like, you see somebody get adjusted, you go, how long did that last?
Right.
And that was the big ugly thing in the room of chiropractic. If you don't want to go 3 times a week or more, then what are you doing here? Why does it keep coming back? Even D. Palmer said the number one cause of subluxation in his day was autosuggestion. So basically what you're doing is you're getting to autosuggestion, which I just think is awesome. And I am so glad that we're talking about it, because I don't think I even fully understood, even though we've talked about it a little bit. But when we catch up about so many things. I feel like I understand what you're doing so much better, and I just think it's awesome. And I'm so glad that you're doing the work, because I can tell you, so many people and so many practitioners are absolutely stuck with people at this level. They're absolutely stuck. And until this changes, and there's lots of different ways to do this, but until you find somebody that can help you do that, it's very difficult to do it on your own, because a lot of this is unconscious and compulsive. And it's just like the program is open.
Yeah.
Or you make the decisions.
Exactly. I'll give you an example of this. I'm assuming that maybe there'll be a lot of clinicians listening to this. And so I was working with a woman she had such a debilitating autoimmune disease, and she was working with a really famous practitioner, and he was trying his hardest it was like perfection, the perfect test, the perfect supplements. Like, you couldn't pick it apart if you tried. A master.
The intervention was just...
Yeah. So this woman, what we were talking, and I just said, what are some major traumas that you've experienced? And she had a trauma that sort of shifted the whole course of her life. She was in surgery and she became conscious during surgery and felt everything.
Oh, man.
And it was so traumatizing to her. And so we look at this and like, how are we going to handle that? Like, give her some PTSD treatments. And there's things that you were talking about, hypnotherapy, EMDR, sound healing, ayahuasca journeying. But there's this other piece too, which everybody can learn and do for free, which is be with herself while she was having a traumatic event and reestablish safety and connection. We cannot change what happened to us, but we can change what we decided about ourselves. And she decided that life was not safe after that.
Wow.
So she regulate her nervous system by imagining what it would have been like if she had actually been there, deeply caring for herself, going through a really challenging event. Now, I'm saying this, and people should not just go do this. There's many steps that I take my clients through before I do this, but I do this because it regulates people's nervous systems. And when nervous systems are regulated, Joe, they can do carnivore and be successful.
You can do anything at that point. That's just it. So at that point, you won't have to. That's
you also see, and then to blow it out even further, some might say that disconnection of that feeling like life was punishing her or whatever it was that she experienced after the surgery, that the diagnosis also is helping her to remind her that she can go back and be with herself in a loving and connected way, that all of the things that appear to be punishing us can also be seen as ways to assist us to go in and say, wow, my parent left me. That was really painful. Oh, I know how to be with myself when that happened. Oh, I was abused. Oh, I know how to be with myself when that happened.
It's so fascinating to talk to you, because the last thing some people want to hear when they're going through stuff is could be one of the best opportunities in your life. And you don't want to make that mistake as a clinician, but like the truth is, and I've started working with a coach the last year, and it's really, of course, we've all heard that these experiences in your life, if you overcome them, it's like cliche and a trope. Okay. But it's also awesome. And I can say that he helped me really, like, unrelated. It was almost like he set me up. It was so beautiful. So I went through this process, and I hate doing this. I listed all these things that I like about myself, which I don't like doing to begin with. I hate doing that. So I listed these things, and then somehow enlisting that and going through this process with him, I was able to determine that all of those things evolved from me learning how to do those things as a way of dealing with some adversity in my life. And it was like, wow. So all these different cool things that I'm using every day, relying on as a clinician to help other people, really came from me overcoming adversity, or the perception of adversity, as a child and during different periods of my life. And it's like, wow, what kind of gift is that? It's so amazing. And of course, somebody who's sitting there in the middle of that adversity right now, it's screw off, you know what I mean? Like, that's the last thing you want to hear. But what do you tell people in those moments? Because we see people every day still in that adversity, and we know that if we can help them through that, it's actually could be one of the best things that ever happened to them in terms of recovering from that.
Yeah.
Recovering from it. Okay. So what do you tell somebody in the throes of that adversity that shows up?
Sometimes I say, you got out of bed and you put your foot on the floor, and that you won today. It is a skill that we learn as good clinicians to meet our clients where they are at and not push them too hard, but help them feel the hope, because they have to do this work themselves, but to feel the hope and hold the loving for them that they can when they're ready. And that's when it switches from when you work with a patient who believes that they are unworthy or unlovable, and then they're able to work this process to care for themselves, create connection and safety. They switch it from being an unlovable person trying to deal with their MS to being a person who had an experience where they felt unlovable, but that was temporary. And now they're trying to deal with their MS. It's so different, but there is no one way that I know to say if someone's feeling super, super hopeless, what to say, except that it comes a time when I think that people hear something inside of themselves, they feel the energy, they feel the spark, or all of their safety mechanisms. This is what happened for me. Every single one of my safety mechanisms stopped working, and I had no more choices but to love the hurt parts of myself. And so that's life gave me that huge gift. And I had to vote for myself. So everybody gets challenged to come to the point in time where they're going to vote or not vote. And if they don't vote tomorrow, then they're going to get a different challenge in a week that's going to say, are you ready to vote yet? Are you ready? Is it
Where do you think
time?
that comes from? Where do you, so in that regard, it almost sounds like we are being tested. Do you believe we are? Do you believe in that? Do you believe that maybe life is trying to teach us something?
A test and teach, I feel like, are a little bit different because a test means that you can pass or fail. And teaching is, I think, the process that we're going through of remembering our wholeness and remembering that no matter what, we'll have ourselves and our own loving. And because we know that some people get diagnosed with diseases and they do not recover from them. And there's just as much abundance there for them as there is for people who recover. And so in a way, we have to broaden our definition of what we're doing here. I think we're learning to love ourselves and trust ourselves in any circumstance.
That's awesome. I thought you were going to say they must do AIP, and if they don't love themselves, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Or your family. You hate your family and you hate yourself if you don't do AIP. Okay, that's beautiful. You brought something up that I think is important, especially in the Bay Area where we live. You brought up ayahuasca. What's your feeling on ayahuasca? Just globally. I know it's a broad question, but like when you hear ayahuasca, what comes to mind for you in terms of like overall and then in the healing space? Like, what do you think of that?
I think people have had absolutely amazing experiences and it's changed and moved a lot of things. And I personally don't do it and never would and never will, but that's just me because I feel like it distracts me from tapping into my own inner compassion.
Yeah, I have had some personal experience with it, and I had a chance to, and it was profound for me, okay? But I also, I have a hard time advocating for it as well because I feel like what we can do and what you can do in this kind of setting without an altered state is intentionally get to this stuff. When a person gets into ayahuasca, and look, I have friends that facilitate this stuff, and I have full respect for them and hear about the amazing stories and all this stuff. So I'm definitely not poo-pooing that. I would say that if you're considering it, just consider that it's very hard to predict what's going to happen there. And
Yes.
sometimes not good things happen. Oftentimes good things happen with the kind of work that you're talking about. Not to say one's better than the other, but it seems to me like the work that you're doing is more intentional and kind of meeting people where they are and could be less risky and again more intentional. Like you can actually walk through that, whereas in those experiences, although they can be profound, and if you've ever seen How to Change Your Mind on Netflix, did you watch that documentary?
I did, yeah.
It's amazing. So look, I'm definitely not putting it down, okay? But I just think that for people that want to find that resolution to inner conflict, or maybe you hear us talk, me and Jess talking, and you're like, yeah, this is me, I'd really like to explore something. There are ways to do that without going that route too, you know what I mean? And it's just really cool to hear more about it. I've heard of heart math for years, but it's, my perspective is that I tend to see people that have tried so many things and it hasn't worked out for them. So sometimes I wonder if those things, how great they are. But then at the same time, like I'm not seeing the cases where it worked really well. So I understand I have a confirmation bias there. And I'm sure the same could be said for the noetic practice and things that you're talking about. I'm just really glad that we had this conversation. I'm hopeful that with this understanding, I can actually be a better clinician for the people that are counting on me, a better teacher for doctors that are counting on me to share information. And so thank you so much for sharing all this with me today. I'm really excited to hear about your next endeavor. I know that you're always growing as a clinician, and I would love to hear about what your next project is after this book launches. And is there anything else that you want to share with us today before we say goodbye?
I would say that we live in a world that tells us we can't trust the inward journey into our hearts, and that's a path that we each have to experiment with to see. But I haven't seen it fail anyone yet. And so that what appears to be troubles or hard things that we're handling are here to teach us something about our life, even if it's hard things that we need to understand. And that's really good news, and that there's always more there by leaning in. So, and I feel so thankful when anyone is willing to take this topic up, Joe, and discuss it. And so I just really want to thank you for having the willingness to open it up so that other people can decide that they're worth the vote.
Hey, that's awesome. It's my pleasure. The next one, let's do sometime after your book comes out. We'll do it in person.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, thank you, Jess.
All right, take care, Joe.
I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in. I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in.